Welcome to another edition of Peninsula Speaks. I am your host, Kenneth Pizzi. I am here in San Mateo, California, at the CSM Theater at the College of San Mateo campus. I am interviewing tonight David Laderman, professor of film studies and author of Driving Visions, Exploring the Road Movie. So David, tell me, Driving Visions, Exploring the Road Movie. Why the road movie of all subjects?
There's a lot of reasons why. I mean, the road movie is something that kind of was born as its own genre in the mid to late 1960s with the counterculture and the whole sensibility of wanting to leave home, wanting to protest conformity. And for that reason alone, it's a significant genre of that time period. But it also pulls together a lot of classical Hollywood traditions, like the tradition of the Western or the screwball comedy, the film noir. A lot of the traditional Hollywood genres kind of had road movie elements that come together with the road movie. Beyond that, I think that the idea of the road movie is kind of, crucial to understanding American culture, American society, the whole idea of mobility and of freedom, of tourism, of the frontier, of migration, people coming from other countries to travel here. It goes back to Columbus, and the whole idea of the journey, which resonates on many levels. It's kind of an archetype.
So there's a very important historical context tied in with that as well.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of cinematic historical context, yes, because it refers back to classical genres and announces a new genre of the counterculture, but also historically because of literature and philosophy and more general cultural trends related to America as a place where people have always moved around in different ways, and that's kind of been important to American identity.
It's interesting to note that Roland Barthes once said cars are our cathedrals, and the car and the road movie are really linked together, I think. I think you mentioned that in your opening chapter, Paving the Road.
Yes.
Or Paving the Way, I should say.
Right.
That even though motorcycles, vans, and other vehicles were incorporated in the road movie, it was always the automobile that was the vehicle of choice.
Yes. I mean, I think one thing that you might want to think about, or viewers might want to think about, is road movies aren't necessarily movies about cars. I mean, there's a whole kind of parallel tradition of movies that fetishize the automobile and sort of drag racing films or hot rod movies.
Exactly.
There's all kinds of sort of subgenres related to the road movie that come out in the mid-50s and really take off in that same time period, the 1960s. But the road movie, as I kind of see it, really has to do with getting into a car and it being a kind of individual vehicle, literally and figuratively, for this transformation, this trek, this experience that has to do with going outside of convention. Outside of geographic convention, outside of symbolic, psychological, or spiritual conventions, and having this kind of limit experience, this sense of danger, this sense of discovery, and it relates a lot to what you brought up, this idea that the automobile in the 50s and 60s becomes more accessible, more stylized, more connected with individual identity. As an extension of identity and something that can be used to explore oneself and one's nation.
And also, for example, in the road movie, quasi-buddy movie, it allows the two characters to interact being in the same vehicle.
Yes.
Physically.
Yes. Which is I think is very important, and which is one of the many reasons why I think you tend to see cars as opposed to motorcycles or trains or trucks, because cars work nicely as far as having a couple travel together. The romantic male-female couple is sort of the foundation of most narrative cinema, one of the essential kernels, and so that translates well into the road movie. But of course, you also have this tradition you mentioned of the two male buddies, or now two possibly female buddies, going out and interacting inside the car, and that being part of the experience. And often road movies will play on this tension between being inside the car and what kind of space that is like, versus the landscape, often the desert or the forest or the jungle or what have you, the wilderness, and traveling through that and getting out of the car and having experiences and getting back in. But the interior space of the automobile is kind of like a mobile context of intimacy.
Right.
That's where there's a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
If I can make
and it propels the narrative forward.
Yes, yes, and it allows for the kind of interaction. Otherwise, you've just got driving.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you need drama. You need interpersonal dynamic.
I would agree.
So.
Definitely. In the chapter Paving the Way, you talk about the literary foundations for the road movie. You go all the way back to Homer's Odyssey, the idea of trying to get back home. But two novels that you mentioned have a real significant impact on the road film, and that is, of course, John Ford's Grapes of Wrath from 1939, and the other book, On the Road, written in 1955 by Jack Kerouac.
Right. And the author of the book, The Grapes of Wrath, of course, would be
Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck.
Right.
But it's easy to confuse them because John Ford made a film the very next year.
Exactly.
The book came out in 1939, and Ford, jumped on the idea and made a film.
A very successful one.
A very successful film, a very important film that I talk about a lot in the book. And the book had a huge impact when it first came out, and that's why it was kind of immediately turned into a film by one of the great American directors. And yes, The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck and On the Road by Kerouac, I guess we're talking about 15 years later, very different sensibilities, but very, very important to the emergence of the road movie as a film, because especially Kerouac's book On the Road, I think, provided a lot of the basic information and imagery and sensibility of what the road movie would pick up on.
The
of course,
exploits of Sal and Dean.
Yes, exactly. The two guys who travel back and forth across the U.S. and they're bohemian, they're beatniks, they're into sex and drugs and jazz, and they don't like middle class America,
Right.
and they want to rediscover the country and reinvent themselves, and have these these limit experiences, these marginal experiences, and so, driving in a variety of formats in that book is I mean, it's the main subject matter. I mean, everything happens through their traveling, and so that sense of freedom and rebellion, I think, really gets picked up on in film in the mid-'60s.
Okay.
And late 60s.
We'll get into that in a little bit later.
Great.
But, Grapes of Wrath, you say, deals more or less with the concept or the theme of the home founding journey, I think, quote unquote,
Yes.
in your book.
Yes.
And also with the notion of escape and reflectional revelation.
Right.
Is another concept. You want to comment on that a
Yes,
little bit?
sure. Yeah, I mean, The Grapes of Wrath is also, of course, a brilliant book, and has more of a socially critical edge, or a different kind of socially critical edge, of course, taking place during the Depression. And one of the things I put forward in the book is this idea that the Depression is an important time period